I got another question. Um, so I kind of, for a while, because I hang around with Chuck and all that, I kind of thought we were most people were on the same page when it came to uh, church, like the church identity and identifying church and calling it church, and church is really important and worth fighting for here. And not everybody shares that view, and so I've had to go back and say why. Um, I need to be able to articulate why is church necessary for sustained multiplication. So that's the broad question I like to throw at you, and then I'll add that I'm waiting for the government to revoke 501c3 status so that we will rule the nation.
Yeah, I won't take on 501(c)(3). If we got rid of it, it might actually help us a lot. Which is kind of what you're implying. Church registration has a whole nother feel in Vietnam and Laos where I hang out. But in the end of the day, it's interesting. They all register. They all want their nonprofit status. So it's a bizarre world. Um, I think it's worth defining what church is, and we do need to shoot for church. That's certainly the biblical example throughout the book of Acts and the whole New Testament, is that's where it ends. That make disciples, Great Commission, is not just individuals, but the example, of course, are churches. So every epistle is addressed to a church, except for Timothy and Titus. Of course, they have a different purpose, but the other epistles are addressed to a church, or actually multiple churches, the churches of Galatia and so on. So Paul's end game was always to create church. And you can do your studies and just say, okay, what do we define? What do we describe as the essential elements of biblical church? And keep it simple. Otherwise, you're going to end up with an elephant. But it is important that everyone's clear. This is the creature we're shooting for. This is what church is for us. And to me, to move from field 3 to 4, there's a leadership piece, an identity piece, and all the functions locally administered. So there's just 3 kind of defining traits there to make a church. But we need some definitive pitch. Why do we need churches? Why do we need new churches in places where we have churches? And for me, one of the best logics is the existing churches have gotten you exactly what you see. Whatever that percent is of your city that's reached, okay, all of those churches can touch whatever that percent is, 10% or 20% of the population. Now we've got 80 or 90% that are outside the church. Therefore, we need new churches. We need new structures. We need new flavors and tastes for those churches, because there's no way we can just keep growing out the existing and expect to reach the 80% or 90% that's in the gap of unreachedness. So just a gap analysis of where we're not, I think, is compelling that we need new kinds of churches. And then you throw in Barna research that says you've got a lot of people who would never come to an existing church, but they're spiritually hungry. All the more reason we need new churches. So we can't just send people to existing churches. And then you can go back into history and you can bring out some examples like George Whitefield, who gets to his deathbed and says, all my disciples are like strings of sand. That is, they just got washed away, because he came with the assumption that he's going to lead people to Jesus and they're just going to fit into existing churches. So he assumed in his whole ministry there's no need for new churches. Biggest regret at the end of his life, I didn't make disciples, I didn't make churches. Gee, I wish I'd been like John Wesley and had some mechanism to gather people into groups. Now, John Wesley had a way to make groups, but John Wesley didn't do intentional church planting. And so he just saw steady addition growth in his lifetime. But when he cut the cord and he said to the Methodists in America, go ahead and make churches, you know what happened? It went exponential, because they intentionally planted churches. And so under Asbury and Dr. Koch, in the first 30 years, from the day, literally to the day, that John Wesley said, okay, make disciples, we got that part down, but go ahead and make churches, they went viral, and they went coast to coast, and they had 6 million members by the end of Asbury's life. And so you see the value of intentional church planting in the case study of the Methodists. I've written all these things up in different papers, and that it's out there, okay? It's in the history, but it's a compelling case. Why do we need to plant new churches? I mean, what if George Whitefield had intentionally planted churches? Or John Wesley said, we're not just a renewal movement, but we're going to start new churches. I think Methodism would have just gone crazy all over England and maybe even beyond throughout Europe. But he held in the reins. He said, no, we're just going to bring renewal in the existing church and call it good. We'll just make these 3/3 groups in existing churches and call it good. And he just had steady addition growth his whole life. What if he'd said, let's do churches? Oh my goodness. I think there'd be millions more people in the kingdom. And his own downstream in Asbury and Coke in the U.S. is the proof. I'm talking fast here. What are you guys hearing?
Asbury and Coke. I'm still taking church history up to the Reformation, so I haven't got to the Methodists yet. But Asbury and Coke were like Wesley's key guys.
They were his key guys in America. And Asbury was British, but they both, Francis Asbury and Coke, okay, were the superintendents over Methodism as a process in the United States until 1784, when John Wesley wrote them a letter and said, okay, from this day forward, you guys are on your own. You're not connected to me. You don't report to me. We're going to empower you, and I want you to go ahead and plant churches. And you can chart the growth of the Methodism in the United States. And exactly in that year, 1784, is the pivot point where it goes viral. And there's only one change: intentional church planting. All the other processes were the same. They had the lay leaders. They had a good discipleship group, high accountability, a lot of good movement practices. But they just changed the one thing through an intentional church planting and went nuts. So today in America, people are filing out of the existing church, but they're still spiritually seeking and hungry. And you guys knock doors just like I knock doors, and you're meeting them all the time. And there's a lot of spiritual hunger in America. Friends, way more than I see in Buddhist Asia, I'll tell you that. There's way more hunger here. So that's an opportunity which can be capitalized on if we intentionally do church planting. And so there's the argument from history, especially with Methodism. There's just logic. Okay, we're not reaching the 80%, so we need new stuff. Let's go do it. And 3 is the biblical example. The apostolic model ended in new churches. It did not just end in new believers.
Yeah, it's just like a pep talk, because we usually hear everything but this. And we're constantly confronting it all the time. So it's like, man, I'm a motivated guy right now. Thank you.
All right, yeah, fired up. We got Jim motivated. We're going to see things happen. Well, I honor and respect all of you guys. You're doing the stuff, and you're putting in the hard work. That's something that's not in the books yet, how hard this is. There's a lot of hard work to find a true person of peace. It's a lot of hard work to start discipling, because you get into everyone's mess, and their lives are a huge mess. And if you put in that work, it's just hard work. If
it was easy, we wouldn't like it.